Hey guys! So today is a tired day, so we're gonna keep it simple. We are gonna talk about agile development, so let's get into it. Now, this was a subscriber question that I got the other day, where basically this viewer wanted me to elaborate a little bit on the way that I'm accustomed to, or the way that I and my coworkers from the past have been using agile development. So let's first and foremost talk about agile, for those of you who are not indoctrinated in the most hip, trendy, modern, standard practice way of doing software development today. So agile development is the idea that you basically have a continuous collaboration between yourself and your stakeholders. And for that to make any type of sense, we have to go back before we had agile development, which was a system that was fairly popular, which most people will refer to as the waterfall method. And the idea there is basically that each department is part of a chain, or a waterfall if you will, and each department has a specification that is handed down, that basically like an assembly line type of deal, where you know what to expect, what the requirements are. You build your thing and you kind of take part in your part of all of this and finish your work, and then you basically hand it over to the next department for the next step of the chain. Now, what people realized with this is that it is damn hard to get something right and to foresee all the possible questions and considerations that kind of happen when you have this mentality. Because imagine this yourself. I mean, imagine if you have several departments who are going to take care of this, right? And imagine that like somewhere along the line there's these questions which makes you and your department have to kind of change the specification, or like make kind of changes to what has actually been decided on, and there's really no way for you around it. Well, then you kind of have to go back all the way to whoever needs to take care. Like, there might have to be changes further up the chain. Like, it's trust me when I say this, guys, making a specification that foresees all the possible things that can come up during a delivery is immensely tricky. It is why you might ask sometimes why there's so many times where the government or whoever fucks up construction projects and stuff of that nature. Because, guys, it is really hard to have this way of working right, to just foresee all of this stuff. So that made people start to adopt this idea of agile development. And so agile is, well, it's a different take on this, where instead of having a specification which you follow, like where basically you sit and do all the prep work first and foremost, and then you kind of work from the specification downwards, you have a ongoing project. So in other words, you will have what we call a sprint. A sprint is basically a period of time where you have allocated a certain amount of work, which basically the delivery team, or the software team in this scenario, thinks is feasible to achieve in the given time. In other words, you never plan the whole project. You never go further than 2 weeks, or depending on, I mean, it doesn't have to be 2 weeks, it can be months, if that, depending on your desired time step, right? But you never plan more than that. And so you fill up basically your backlog, which is just a big list of all the things that you need to get done, with a prioritized list of the things that you want the developers to start with, and then kind of cascades, it descends from there, right? So most important at the top and then downwards. And then you just basically pick things off that pile, and in 2 week sprints, the basic, depending on your philosophy, but the idea is that you are not allowed to change anything about the workload. The developers are not to be disturbed or whatever during that period of time, so that we don't get this ugly thing that we call scope creeping. And scope creeping is basically, guys, where you sit and work for X amount of days, and then the HIPPO, which is another nice abbreviation for highest paid person opinion, comes into your office and says, hey guys, awesome work, just make this happen instead. And all of a sudden you kind of have to go back and you have to do some changes because somebody decided that, oh right, well, we really want this to happen and that to happen, and so forth and so forth. So the idea here is that you just have this continuous process, And to get more practical and actually get down to specifics, the first thing that usually happens is that your stakeholders will have some type of roadmap. And a roadmap, guys, is just their basic, like a rough plan of the things that they want to happen going forward within the company, right? And after that, you kind of break that down into what we call epics. And an epic is basically a concrete specification. See, there's always a specification of what should actually happen, or like a feature. Imagine that I don't know, you're creating a salary management system. So the roadmap is to manage, you know, the different aspects of like tax calculations, payment, and say time reporting. Those are three like roadmap features, if you will, or epics, if you will. And the thing with these features is that these sorts of epics is more an entire concept that you're working towards, while it's kind of big. You know, one single person cannot possibly sit down and take care of all the things that are associated with time reporting, for example, because it's a very complicated thing. So you break those down into what we call stories, and a story is just a piece of work which you as a group decide this is a good amount of work to be inputted. Ideally, you want to have a story that has a very natural size. In other words, you want something to be delivered. You can't make it, you know, you can't just say, oh yeah, this story, like this piece of work is about making the text black on the page. That's too small. But you don't want to say either, don't want to go on the other extreme and say, hey, implementing like the entire feature, like implement the whole epic, that's too big. So a sweet spot for, say, time reporting would have been that, yeah, we have a story here, we want you to create the date picker component and it should be possible to pick the dates, for example. That's a good story. That's like that's because that's a one-person type of job, and it's something that can be achieved in a feasible amount of time. So that's the basics of how this works. And then you have, well, usually we have what we call a Kanban board. A Kanban board, I don't know how to pronounce that. But anyway, it's just a board with columns which represents the different states a story can be in. So usually you have a backlog or a prioritized list of all the things that haven't been started. Then you move your card to, say, ongoing, where you can represent to the rest of the company that that's what you're working on, and then you move it to either testing or code review, depending on what your workflow looks like, and then finally you push it to the done column when everything is delivered and shipped right. And then you kind of synchronize with your coworkers. You work as normally. We have usually a very common thing that you do is to have what we call the stand-up. So you have morning meetings that should be about 10-15 minutes tops, where everybody just stands at the board, and then you talk about, all right, what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? Are there any issues? Or like you kind of just sync everybody up on what everybody is working on. And this works fairly well. The thing that is good about it, like I'm not going to get into the pros and the cons of this. I'm just kind of declaring the way that I'm accustomed to using agile development. There are benefits and there are consequences, but one of the big benefits to this is that in the first scenario with the waterfall method, you have the issue of miscommunications or changes in requirements that you haven't foreseen, basically, and it's very hard to make changes once the specification has been set. In agile development, on the other hand, you have the opposite. There's a lot of interaction going on between you and the stakeholders, and a lot of, how do I put this? It's easier to make adjustments to specifications, but that also puts, as I said, a bit of pressure on you as a developer, because scope creeping is a factor where, you know, if you're constantly asking people on a 2-week basis to reevaluate the situation and reprioritize what's going to happen, it's very easy for you to have a situation where people, like your stakeholders, basically come in and say, hey, great, but now we want to do this, we want to do that, we want to do this, we want to do that. So it's a different type of problem. But that's the basics of agile development, and I think that you don't have to sit down and like study this stuff, but you should be aware of it, because it's fairly common practice in IT, and it's very likely that you're going to work with it. Have a great day.